Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, ladies and gentlemen, wherever you are in the world. Welcome back to the Caring Economy with me, Toby Usnik. Today, we have as our guest a new friend to me, actually, Frances Bronet. I met her a couple of months ago at our friend Dwight McBride, who's also been a guest here on the Caring Economy, president of the New School University. Frances is the president of Pratt Institute, a rival institution, as fate would have it, here in New York. She's an educator, a leader at the forefront of interdisciplinary learning. Bronet previously served as senior president and provost at Illinois Institute of Technology. She was the acting provost and dean of School of Architecture and Allied Arts for the University of Oregon, and architecture professor, associate dean, and acting dean at Rensselaer Polytech Institute. She has been appointed to the Future of Workers Task Force here in New York City by none other than Mayor Adams himself, underlining her commitment to the bolstering of New York City's talent and workforce development to ensure an inclusive economic recovery. She's also a member of the Consortium of Sustainable Urbanization's Advisory Board. She's an executive board of the Association of Independent Colleges in Art and Design, or ACAD's board, and she's co-chair of the local Myrtle Avenue Business Improvement District. So whether it's national, international, local, Frances Bronet is your person to address these challenges of contemporary life. Welcome to the Caring Economy, Frances Bronet.
Wow, thank you, Toby. Thank you very much.
So, Frances, we always ask our guests to just give us a sort of 2 or 3 minute digest. It's hard with such an accomplished life that you've had. But tell us a little bit about you, where you hailed from, how you were raised, maybe mentored, how you found your way to this great, prestigious institution.
Well, I grew up in inner city Montreal. My father's Holocaust survivor. My mother, her parents came over very late, half the family born in Russia, half the children born in Canada. My parents were working class all their lives. My father was a laborer in a factory till he retired at 75. My mother was both a laborer and then ultimately a salesperson. I would have been considered a street kid. I spent a lot of times on the streets because my parents worked. Also, they were very comfortable with Montreal streets, right? When you come from a place where there's war and you're in a camp, you think Montreal streets are safe, right? They're perfect. So I grew up in the streets. Of course, it's Montreal, so I say that I grew up in the streets, but it's cold half the year. In fact, it's winter still, right? Yeah. So there was something called Neighborhood House, which was an offshoot of the Y. And I only recently found out it was actually for delinquent kids to get them off the street. I had no idea there were social workers. And
guilty as charged.
It was just a place. I understand. I mean, we were bands of kids that were roving, and probably doing things that were not the best things. But I was a smart kid. I was in enriched classes by the time I got to high school. I can't say it was clear I had mentors. I decided to go into architecture and engineering because that's not what anybody I knew was doing. I was good in art. I was good in science. And I did them both together because I thought, I'm going to succeed someplace. If I fail out of architecture or engineering, I can go into science. I can go to, ridiculous rungs of a ladder that I had established. My parents didn't go to school. My father didn't go to school at all. And my mother dropped out in 8th grade. So when people say, if I had just gotten to high school, I fundamentally was first gen high school. So I understand it. I was totally scholarship students. Of course, it was Canadian school, so $800 a year is a whole different ballgame. But I have a commitment to that about how do you get to school and how do you make sure that everybody who wants to have an education, when I think about Pratt, a creative education, can actually, how do you access that? Where is it? And again, happen to be in a city that has tens and tens and tens of opportunities for universities and colleges. So I was a tutor by the time I was 10 years old. I made 10 times, maybe 15 times as much money as babysitting, except I only had 1 hour a week as opposed to 30 hours a week babysitting. I started teaching right away. So the minute I was a teaching assistant, and then the minute I graduated and I was practicing as an architect, I taught at night in community colleges. And I knew I wanted to become faculty. So I had an office, but I taught at night. And then I went to graduate school at Columbia. So I was at McGill for undergraduate in architecture and engineering. And then I went to architecture at Columbia a few years later after my office was up and going. I always thought I would go back to Montreal and teach at McGill, but that didn't happen. I ended up building a house for a client in Southampton. you can't even imagine. I had no idea what a Southampton was. So I started teaching right after I graduated from Columbia. I was teaching at RPI, Rensselaer Polytechnic Institute. I taught architecture and structures, again, because I was an engineer. And I moved up the ranks there. And when I realized the dean was not going anywhere, I moved out to the University of Oregon to become the dean of the School of Architecture and Allied Arts, now the College of Design. I was always somebody who sort of navigated relationships and made sure that even though the School of Architecture and Allied Arts was relatively small, it was 1,600 students in a school that had 25,000 students, I was really interested in leading. And so I led the deans for a while. And when there was a moment that they had to put in an acting provost, even though I did not have a PhD, which is very unusual to become a provost without the highest academic rank, I was there. And it really opened up everything, that spread of seeing all disciplines. And as you mentioned in your intro, I have always been an interdisciplinary, and it isn't just because I had architecture and engineering. I also did a diploma in business, but I was working in dance from the get-go and building large-scale dance installations. I launched a whole number of programs in product design and innovation, really thinking about how do we break open the creative arenas and inform other disciplines that there's a value in what does iteration look like? What does creativity look like? And I see it now. I mean, we see the business community saying, the creative economy, or what is creative, thinking, what is open-ended thinking, what is design thinking? And these are very, very difficult practices. They're not something you just take on, you do a bunch of stickies and you have an answer. And I think they're rigorous. And I think understanding that knowledge as expert knowledge, whether you're an anthropologist, you're in fintech, you're a data scientist, how do you pull all the ways that we do our work together so that something that we couldn't possibly imagine emerges? And I think that's what's so extraordinary about, ultimately getting here. I went to an engineering institution from the University of Oregon to become the provost there at Illinois Institute of Technology in Chicago. And that was a remarkable place too, where remember their School of Architecture was run by Mies van der Rohe many, many decades ago. Their School of Design was run by Moholy-Nagy. I mean, this was a place of extraordinary thinking and profound work. Coming to Pratt was really something. There was a political dimension to Pratt. Everybody understands Pratt as an extraordinary art and design school, and actually has the oldest library science program in the country as well. And I think people understand it as that art and design and perhaps a kind of investigation around information. But it also has the longest running community design center in the country, which is the Pratt Center for Community Development. Used to be economic development, but fundamentally a commitment by a group of people to really work with the expertise of the local knowledge to have solutions that can make lives better, really thinking about the city as an equitable resource.
And witness, you're joining Mayor Adams's committee now, even that's an extension of that, right?
So that's a really important piece. And I really wanted to be part of that because we see our students, both undergraduate and graduate, working in the world in these creative manners, but truly responsible to the place that they're at and the communities they're engaged with. One of the reasons was if we're trying to build a middle class, fundamentally jobs, positions, careers, callings, whatever you want to call them, for people to have sustenance and joy in their lives long term, where do we have to start? And I think you have to start way, way, way little. And one of the things that we're doing actually is we're launching a high school. So we're launching a high school which is around design and justice. It will be called Design Works. It's in collaboration with Bank Street College of Education, but more importantly, really emerges out of the Department of Education. It was a competition, and it thinks about the idea of design and creating places of equity and justice, environmental, social, economic, from a much younger age. And to imagine places where there isn't this distinction between the learning you do in a studio or a classroom, the learning you do in the city, and the learning you might do in industry. So we have partnerships. When you think about young people at the early ages, they can watch and see and be excited and maybe take something back to the classroom. But very soon, I was tutoring at 10, right? We know at 10, they can be making things. They can be
listening. And taking to technology.
Well, that's for sure. That is absolutely, what do we learn from them, right? They're also our reciprocal partners.
So a couple of questions just from the opening. One is just the Holocaust piece is fascinating, right? I can't learn enough. We can't remind ourselves enough about the Holocaust. You've touched a little bit on how that affected your parents and their life and their choices, but how did that come to bear on you and in your approach to life, having parents who were both Holocaust survivors?
So